Autumn 1946. Hiroshima. In a temporary hut made of scavenged planks and corrugated metal, its roof held down by rocks and scraps of brick, a 19-year-old woman hunched over a crate she used as a table, hands trembling as she wrote words that would have horrified both Japanese officials and American occupiers if they had been published. The map says city. My eyes say wasteland. Her name in later testimonies would be Sech Fumiko. Outside, wind moved through the skeletons of buildings that had once been schools, offices, tram depots. Inside, every creak of the thin walls still sounded to her like the distant rumble of bombers, though the Enola Gay had needed only one pass. The word Hiroshima had not yet become an abstract symbol in textbooks and speeches. For her, it was a specific set of coordinates in her body, the scar on her left arm where skin had hung in strips like cloth, the ache in her bones when the weather changed, the empty places at the dinner mat where her parents and younger brother had once sat. The mathematics of Hiroshima's survival were not written in casualty lists alone. They were being recalculated day after day in the quiet decisions of people like her, whether to marry, whether to have children, whether to speak about what they had seen, or pretend the city's new concrete erased the old ash. What had happened in August 1945 was a point. What she lived through in the late 1940s and 1950s was the long, uneven line that followed. August 6, 1945, the instant that divided her life. At 8:15 a.m. on that Monday, Fumiko had been a factory girl, not a symbol. She was 18, working at a munitions plant on the outskirts of the city, checking shell casings by hand. Her world was already narrowed by war, rice diluted with barley and sweet potatoes, air raid drills, rumors of defeats the newspapers did not fully admit. The sirens had become background noise. That morning, the Alaclear had sounded after an earlier warning. People stepped back into the streets. Trams resumed. The sky was clear. She thought briefly that such a blue sky did not suit a wartime morning. Then the sun fell. Survivors would later say it was like a second sun, a magnesium-white flash that erased shadows and created new ones in a single heartbeat. Fumiko remembered only this, a blinding light, a pressure that crushed the air from her lungs, darkness filled with splintering wood and falling bodies. Her factory was about 2.5 kilometers from the hypocenter. That distance was the difference between instant vaporization and a slower, complicated survival. When she awoke, she was under rubble. Her right hand was pinned, her left arm burned. Her ears rang with a sound that never really stopped in the decades after. Someone, she never knew who, pulled her free. She stumbled out into a world without angles. Houses were smashed flat. Fires were already beginning. People moved without skin, their faces unrecognizable, hands held out in front of them like ghosts, strips of flesh hanging from their fingers. She walked toward the city because there was nowhere else to go. The riverbanks were full of bodies. At one crossing, she saw a woman holding a baby that did not move, calling a name over and over until her voice became raw noise. Later, official numbers would say roughly 70,000, 80,000 dead by the end of 1945. Tens of thousands more in the years that followed. For Fumiko, the number was 3. 3 family members who had been closer to the center, her father at the city office, her mother at home, her 12-year-old brother at school, marching with his class toward a demolition site where student laborers were clearing fire breaks. She never saw any of them again. In the weeks that followed, she learned another new word, genbaku, atomic bomb. It sounded clinical. Nothing about those first days felt clinical. The city burned for hours, then days. People drank from puddles. Black rain, thick with radioactive soot, fell on those who had fled into the hills. No one yet knew that this rain carried another kind of fire inside it, one that would take years to declare itself. 1945.46, the City of Ashes learns to breathe. The war ended officially 9 days later, with the Emperor's voice on the radio. "We must endure the unendurable," he said. For Fumiko, the unendurable had already begun. The surrender brought no immediate relief to Hiroshima. The city had no food, no functioning hospitals, hardly any intact wells. People slept in air raid shelters, on riverbanks, in the shells of buildings whose concrete frames still stood. The Japanese government, itself shattered, designated Hiroshima a dead city at first, uninhabitable, not to be rebuilt soon. But how do you declare dead a place where tens of thousands of the living still move among ruins? Within weeks, the survivors began to build hanba, makeshift huts, illegal at first, thrown together from scorched timber, leftover tiles, sheets of tin. Fumiko shared one such hut with an aunt who had found her by chance in a school-turned-a-field hospital. Their roof leaked. Their floor was packed earth. Their door was a curtain. In winter, snow blew in around the edges. They patched holes with paper. They lived on rationed rice, sweet potatoes, occasionally a few vegetables grown in contaminated soil. Rumors spread that the land itself was cursed, that nothing would grow for 75 years. Fumiko planted anyway, because rumors did not fill bowls. Sometimes the plants withered, sometimes they grew. No one knew if the green leaves meant safety or simply delayed danger. The occupiers arrived. American troops in clean uniforms with radios, jeeps, and cameras. Hiroshima, once a military city filled with soldiers, now held different foreigners. Journalists and scientists came too, measuring blast radii, photographing keloid scars, counting destroyed buildings like pieces on a burned chessboard. Fumiko saw one such team sketching the remains of the Prefectural Industrial Promotion Hall, the structure that would later be known worldwide as the atomic bomb dome. At that moment, it was just another ruin among thousands. They did not sketch her aunt who coughed up blood in the evenings. They did not count the number of times she changed soaked bandages on her own arms, where burns had become raised, ropey-like scars. Radiation, the invisible occupation. In the first months after the bomb, the survivors spoke of pikaldon flashav boom. Radiation was an abstraction. Then people who had seemed unharmed began to sicken. Hair fell out in clumps. Gums bled. Purple spots appeared under the skin. Children who had cried but walked on August the 6th died in November. Doctors, themselves often sick, struggled to name this new disease. Years later, scientists would quantify doses, create charts of external and internal exposure, try to model lifetime cancer risk. For Fumiko, the arithmetic of radiation was more intimate. Each new funeral, each neighbor whose nosebleeds would not stop, each rumor she was farther from the center than we were. He wasn't even in Hiroshima that day, just came later to look for family and fell ill. She watched a girl her age, who had seemed untouched, begin to lose patches of hair. They washed together at a public tap one morning. The girl tried to laugh it off as stress. 3 months later, she was gone. The Americans set up the Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission, Central Z Commission, ostensibly to study long-term effects. Survivors were examined, photographed, measured. Fumiko sat once in a clinic under a bright light, while a foreign doctor prodded her scars and spoke to an interpreter. Very useful case, he said, as if she were a chart, not a person. They took her blood. They took her blood. They did not offer treatment. The ABCC's mandate was to observe, not heal. Outside, she joined a line at a ration office to collect her monthly allocation of rice. To the authorities, she was a data point. To herself, she was a young woman calculating another kind of risk. What did it mean to be Baku Ataikan Sesh? One who had experienced the bomb, not just medically, but socially. Hibakusha, the branded survivors. In the years after the war, a new word spread through Hiroshima and Nagasaki, hibakusha, literally, bomb-affected person. It would later become a badge of activism, a powerful identity in global anti-nuclear movements. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, it was closer to a stigma. Employers hesitated to hire hibakusha. They feared that survivors were weak, prone to illness, unreliable. Doctors could not guarantee the future. Handling heavy loads, working long hours in factories, who knew what radiation had done to hearts, bones, blood. Worse was the question that hung in the air every time marriage was discussed. What about children? Parents of potential spouses whispered, what if their babies are deformed? What if some hidden poison is in their blood? No one could answer definitively. In Fumiko's early 20s, a man from a neighboring district began to visit. He was kind, and she felt something like the faint warmth she remembered from before the war, when she had once walked with a boy under cherry trees that no longer existed. He knew she was from Hiroshima. Everyone nearby did. He did not ask directly how close she had been. His mother did. Exactly where were you that day? She demanded over tea. She demanded over tea, the question framed as concern, not interrogation. Fumiko answered honestly, about 2.5 kilometers. The mother's eyes narrowed just a fraction. Weeks later, the visits stopped. An aunt brought the unspoken message, they worry about grandchildren, you understand? Fumiko did understand. Understanding did not soften the humiliation. Surviving the bomb had become another mark against her in the ledger of marriage prospects. You lived, then you are damaged. You died, then you are mourned as a pure victim. The living were inconvenient. They could contradict official narratives. They could fall sick at unpredictable times. Rebuilding, concrete over ground zero. By the early 1950s, Japan's national priorities were shifting from raw survival to reconstruction and growth. In Tokyo, bureaucrats and U.S. occupation planners drafted policies. In Hiroshima, city officials and local activists saw an opportunity and a necessity. The ruin could not remain only a ruin. They appealed for special status. In 1949, the Hiroshima Peace Memorial City construction law passed, designating Hiroshima as a city to be rebuilt as a global symbol of peace. Urban planners laid out wide boulevards. New bridges spanned rivers still clogged with memories. A central area would become Peace Memorial Park, built around the skeletal dome. Fumiko watched the transformation with mixed feelings. On one level, the changes were undeniable, even miraculous. Trams ran again through the city. Concrete office buildings rose where ashes had piled. Schools reopened in new structures, not just in tents or half-collapsed halls. Children who had not been born in 1945 played in what planners called Peace Park. They climbed on sculptures dedicated to youth and peace, their laughter mixing with speeches on August the 6th each year. Fumiko attended the first Peace Memorial ceremony. She could, after her burns, healed enough to stand in a crowd. The mayor spoke of nuclear weapons as absolute evil. Paper lanterns floated down the Motoyasu River, carrying the names of the dead. Doves were released. Bells rang. Around her, survivors wept, some openly, some silently. Foreign delegations came too, laying wreaths, nodding solemnly. Foreign delegations, toku, nodding solemnly. In that moment, it seemed the world might actually learn from what had happened, that Hiroshima's suffering might help prevent a second such flash. And yet, when she left the ceremony to go to work, She still had to hide her scars under long sleeves in summer to avoid stares. The city was being rebuilt as a stage for lessons about peace. But the extras, the hibakusha, were not always given stable roles. Work, routine, and the ticking inside. In 1952, with the official end of the Allied occupation, Japan regained sovereignty. American soldiers became rarer on Hiroshima's streets. The ABCC remained, however, its compound, a small patch of America within the Japanese city. Fumiko found steady work at a sewing cooperative established by local women and progressive groups. They produced uniforms, bags, simple clothing. Workdays were long. Pay was modest. But sewing allowed her control. Needles, thread, cloth did not explode. She liked the rhythm of the machine. Predictable, unlike the randomness with which illness struck her fellow hibakusha. Sometimes a co-worker would fail to show up for a shift. Later, someone would say quietly, leukemia. They began to call it the up-bomb disease, even before doctors settled on exact terms. In the late 1950s, epidemiologists would begin publishing data, elevated rates of leukemia, especially among those exposed as children. Later, increased solid cancers, thyroid, breast, lung, charts with curves rising decades after 1945. For Fumiko, the disease was not a curve. It was the absence of a girl who had once shared lunch with her under a patch of surviving shade. It was her own sudden fevers, the days when exhaustion flattened her, and she lay wondering if this was the beginning of the delayed death that many hibakusha half expected. Every new symptom carried a question. Is this just a cold? Or is the bomb catching up? Living meant constantly recalculating the odds. Activism, from shame to voice. By the mid-1950s, a shift began among some hibakusha. Until then, many had remained silent, out of shame, fear of discrimination, or simply because the pain of recalling August the 6th was too great. Then came 1954. The US tested a hydrogen bomb at Bikini Atoll. A Japanese tuna fishing boat, the Daigo Fukuji Maruth, Lucky Dragon No. 5, was showered with radioactive fallout. The crew fell ill. One died. The incident sparked massive protests in Japan against nuclear weapons. In Hiroshima, survivors realized that what had happened to them was not a unique, unrepeatable freak event, but part of a global weapons system that was still expanding. Some hibakusha began to speak publicly, to schools, at rallies, to foreign visitors. Fumiko attended a small meeting at a community center in 1956, where survivors were invited to share their stories for a booklet. She sat in the back, sleeves pulled down, heart beating fast. One woman in her 30s stood up, back very straight. "I was 13 when the bomb fell," she said. "I watched my classmates melt. For 10 years, I told no one outside my family. Now they are building bigger bombs. If we remain silent, then what did we survive for?" Her voice did not tremble. Fumiko went home and reopened the notebook she had first used in the hut after the war. "The map says city," she wrote again, "but under the roads and offices the old city is still there. I live in two Hiroshimas, the one tourists see in August, and the one that wakes me when a light bulb flickers too bright." She did not yet volunteer to speak in public. Her scars still felt like accusations. But for the first time, she saw that her experience could be more than a private wound. It could be an argument that said, "We are not just victims, we are warning signs." Family, the second generation's equation. In her early 30s, after years of assuming she would never be chosen, Fumiko married a man from outside Hiroshima Prefecture, a carpenter who had come to work on new housing projects. He had heard rumors of hibakusha, but had not grown up under their shadow. When he learned of her past, he paused visibly. Then he said, "If there are problems, we face them together." It sounded like something from a serialized romance story. Over time, it proved more complicated. When Fumiko became pregnant with their first child, Joy wrestled with fear. Doctors could not provide clear answers about genetic effects. The waiting months became a new kind of countdown. In August 1960, 15 years after the bomb, she gave birth to a healthy daughter. 10 fingers, 10 toes. No visible abnormalities. Relief flooded the small hospital room. But the question did not vanish. It merely shifted time frame. What about childhood illnesses? Cancer at 20. Infertility at 30. The bomb had turned her body into a long experiment, and now, possibly, her child's. At school, her daughter would one day attend peace education programs, be taken to the museum, shown glass fused by heat, children's tricycles, tattered uniforms. Teachers would say, "Never again." Some classmates whose families had come from other regions after the war would whisper, "Her mother is a hibakusha." The second generation learned about the bomb in two languages, the official, polished one of museums and ceremonies, and the rough, inconsistent one of family silences, sudden hospital visits, whispered fears. The world comes to Hiroshima. By the 1960s, Hiroshima had become a global symbol. Delegations from around the world came to lay wreaths, ring the peace bell, sign guest books. Anti-nuclear movements in Europe and America adopted the mushroom cloud as a warning icon. Hibakusha testified at international conferences, some traveling outside Japan for the first time. Fumiko watched, half proud, half wary, as images of her city appeared in foreign magazines, photographs of the dome at sunset, shots of children releasing doves, quotes from survivors neatly framed. The world's gaze helped pressure governments on nuclear testing. It also risked turning Hiroshima into a backdrop, a moral theatre where others could perform their virtue. One afternoon, as she walked past the museum, she saw a group of Western tourists joking loudly, their guide translating simplified stories. They spent perhaps an hour in the exhibits, then went to shop for souvenirs. Fumiko felt a sudden flash of anger, rare in a woman who had trained herself to endure. For her, the bomb was not an afternoon lesson or a symbol in a debate. It was the reason her brother had never grown older than 12. It was the invisible variable in every medical checkup. It was the gap between the word Hiroshima on television and the smell of burned hair that still sneaked into her dreams. Two cities in one body. By the late 1960s, the Hiroshima skyline contained no obvious ruins except the preserved dome. Department stores, office towers, apartment blocks. At night, neon signs reflected on rivers that had once carried bodies. The Hiroshima miracle, the speed and scale of reconstruction, was praised in policy papers. You could arrive by train, walk from the station to the Peace Park, buy souvenirs, and never quite grasp that the ground beneath your feet had boiled on a single summer morning. For younger residents born after 1945, the bomb was an inherited memory, not a lived one. They learned dates, August 6, August 9. Numbers, 8,015 AM, 600 meters, 4,000 degrees. They did not know the taste of rationed barley, the sound of a mother's voice turning hoarse, calling for children buried under collapsed beams. Fumiko lived in both Hiroshimas at once, the bustling regional capital of the Chijuku district, with factories, schools, baseball games. The flattened, burning plain that lay just under its surface in her mind. When she went to the peace ceremony each year, she stood among crowds holding silent prayers. When the moment of silence began at 8,015, cicadas screamed in the trees. For many, that minute was a respectful ritual. For her, it was an opening of a door she tried to keep shut the rest of the year. She would remember again the silhouettes burned onto walls, the voices that stopped mid-word, the way the sky had been so unnaturally clear. Then the bell would toll, speeches would resume, and officials would speak of Hiroshima's mission as a city of peace. On the way home, she might stop at a supermarket where fluorescent lights buzzed and canned goods lined shelves. Her granddaughter would tug at her hand, asking for sweets. She would buy them because she could. She had lived through years when sweetness did not exist. The arithmetic that never balanced. Historians, doctors, and urban planners have tried to capture Hiroshima with numbers and plans, death toll estimates, radiation dose reconstructions, economic growth charts showing recovery, blueprints of boulevards and parklands. All of these are necessary. None of them can fully express the calculation Fumiko made each time she looked in the mirror at her scars. Was my survival a gift or a sentence? Her life, stretching from the late 1920s into the 1970s and beyond, became its own kind of graph. A spike of unimaginable violence at 18. Then a long, uneven plateau of work, small joys, illnesses, activism, discrimination, love, fear. The bomb had been instantaneous. Its afterlife was measured in decades. When she returned someday to the sentence she had written in that hut back in 1946, the map says city. My eyes say wasteland. She added years later, now the map and the streets. Only my bones remember the wasteland. People come to learn from us. I hope they learn that the worst thing about such a bomb is not that it kills so many at once. It is that it keeps killing, in bodies, in families, in dreams, long after the flash. The world most often remembers Hiroshima as a moment, a mushroom cloud frozen in grainy black and white, an entry in a timeline. For Fumiko and hundreds of thousands like her, it was not a moment. It was a lifetime lived in the shadow of a light that had burned too bright to be seen only once.